Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu News Analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to cover today. I have chosen 10 important articles from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. We have two articles for a detailed discussion. We have an article on the upcoming BRICS Summit, and we also have an article regarding how the Supreme Court is trying to tackle gender stereotyping. Both are very important topics from the mains point of view. We'll discuss them comprehensively, and then we shall take a look at a number of prelims related articles. Usually in the Sunday newspaper, the Hindu carries many small articles which are very, very important for your prelims. So let's try and cover all these articles in detail. And before we begin, why don't you press the like button? And once the session ends, do comment, share these videos with other aspirants, and also don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin our discussion by looking at this article from page number 11 that examines the importance of the upcoming BRICS Summit. So let's carry out a detailed discussion. In fact, I pointed out this topic yesterday as well. I told you that the BRICS Summit is coming up. There are a lot of important developments to look forward to. So let's understand the context. Let's talk about the background of BRICS, and let's see why the upcoming BRICS Summit is important, particularly for India. Because throughout the next week, we will have many more articles related to the 15th BRICS Summit. The 15th BRICS Summit is all set to be held at Johannesburg in South Africa from the 22nd of August to the 24th of August. So as a result of the upcoming BRICS Summit, the Hindu will definitely carry plenty of articles throughout the week. So let's set the foundation today by talking about BRICS, its background, its significance, its role in global geopolitics, and we will also examine the importance of the upcoming summit, so that you guys have the right foundation for the next week when the summit takes place at Johannesburg. I hope you know that the BRICS, it's essentially a movement of 5 emerging economies. 5 major emerging economies came under the BRICS grouping to provide a new alternative to the global economy and the global financial architecture. So the upcoming summit is extremely important because it's happening at a time when the global economy is facing a number of challenges. In China, there has been a slowdown in economic growth. In several countries, inflation has been shooting up. The US has increased interest rates again. And there is a widespread fear of a long-term recession in the global economy. So at this crucial juncture, when the BRICS countries meet, they will look at all the global economic issues and challenges. And as a result, the summit acquires a lot of significance. And also remember, the last 4 years have been quite difficult for the global economy. First, we had the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we had the Russia-Ukraine war. Both these events, they disrupted global supply chains, and they continue to have a widespread impact on economies around the world. So the BRICS Summit that brings together 5 important emerging economies is going to be very crucial to solve some of these economic challenges. Also, the summit is taking place at a crucial time in global geopolitics, because global geopolitics is in a state of flux due to the Russia-Ukraine war and the standoff between Western countries and Russia, the sanctions that Western countries have imposed on Russia, and also the constant tensions between US and China. These global geopolitical events, they present a number of challenges for the world, and the BRICS countries are meeting at such a crucial juncture, and hence the summit acquires all the more significance. Many Western countries, which have often been critical of BRICS, even they will pay a lot of attention. The United States, European Union, and other Western countries, they will closely monitor the BRICS Summit. They will look out for the developments that will come out of the BRICS Summit. Because the BRICS grouping in itself is a very prominent, significant grouping of 5 major emerging economies. So let's study the origins of the group. Let's understand how this group came about and what keeps these countries together and what their objectives are. See, BRICS is an acronym. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This acronym was first coined in the year 2001, and initially it was just known as BRIC, B-R-I-C, referring to Brazil, Russia, India, and China. This acronym was identified by Jim O'Neill, the former chairman of Goldman Sachs, in a research paper that he had brought out. Right? Goldman Sachs is a very popular and a major investment banking firm. So the former chairman, James O'Neill or Jim O'Neill, he identified that there are 5 countries which have the highest potential as far as their economic opportunities are concerned. And he pointed out that these 4 countries in particular, the BRIC countries, they represent the emerging economies. So this is what popularized the acronym BRIC. It was coined by Jim O'Neill in 2001. So to begin with, it was not an initiative by these countries, by these governments. It was just an economic reference that was made by Jim O'Neill, where he referred to the emerging economies of the world, and he said that Brazil, Russia, India, China have the maximum economic potential to offer a new economic alternative. Because until 2001, the global economy was largely dominated by the Western countries. Even the global financial institutions and the global economic architecture was largely controlled by the Western countries. So when Jim O'Neill proposed this theory, the acronym BRIC became widely popular, and in the year 2006, these countries met for the first time in a formal setup where the foreign ministers of BRIC countries met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting in the year 2006. This was the first time the acronym BRIC was being given a formal structure. Because by 2006, global economic issues were rising. And these emerging economies, they had common concerns. India, China, Russia, Brazil, they had similar concerns about global institutions like World Bank, IMF, the WTO, and how all these platforms were dominated by the Western countries. So these common concerns drove these countries together, and they formally held a meeting of their foreign ministers, thus establishing a formal structure for BRIC. Following this, the global economy was hit by a major recession in 2009-2010. It was a result of the subprime crisis, the mortgage crisis in the US housing market, which destroyed many banks and financial institutions, and it had a domino effect on the global economy. So this crisis that emerged in the US and in the Western world was a result of financial mismanagement. It was a result of financial incompetence as far as Western institutions and Western authorities were concerned. So the BRIC countries decided that they had to create a parallel global economic architecture to counter and challenge the Western dominance in the global financial architecture. So this is what led to the first ever BRICS Summit that would bring the prime ministers and presidents of these countries together. And the first BRICS Summit was held in the year 2009 at Yekaterinburg in Russia. So thus the BRICS Summit was formalized. So from there onwards, almost every year, the BRICS Summit has been held that brings the leaders of these countries together. In 2010, that is 1 year after the first summit was held, a new member was added, that is South Africa. South Africa formally joined the grouping only in 2010, and thus the BRIC became the BRICS. The grouping came to be known as the BRICS following the induction of South Africa into the organization. Now let me explain why this grouping is significant. Let's look at some important numbers which you can actually use in your mains answers as well while justifying the significance of the BRICS organization. Now if you put these countries together, Collectively, they represent nearly 42% of the global population. They account for more than 3 billion people. Their total cumulative population is more than 3 billion. Almost close to half the world population is present in just these 5 countries. They account for a significant part of the global land area, almost 26.6%, and their combined GDP is much more than 23% of the global GDP. They contribute significantly to global trade. In fact, these numbers are from 2021. In the last 2 years, there has been a further jump in the share of BRICS countries in the global GDP and with regard to their contribution to global trade. They're also blessed with immense resources. So no wonder Jim O'Neill recognized these countries, at least the BRIC countries, as the emerging economies of the future. Now the concern for these countries is that even though they are major emerging economies and very soon they're going to challenge the developed countries, they have never been given equal representation at institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. This had always been a major concern for the BRICS countries. If you look at the Bretton Woods institutions that were set up after the Second World War, which is the World Bank and the IMF, these global financial institutions have been largely dominated by Western countries. World Bank has been providing funds for development. IMF provides contingency funds to bail out countries that are facing a liquidity crisis. These critical global financial institutions are entirely dominated by the Western countries. The World Bank is largely controlled by the United States, whereas IMF is largely dominated by the European Union. These countries have retained a higher voting share at the IMF for themselves. If you look at IMF's quota distribution and how the voting share is distributed, the Western countries have retained most of the voting share for themselves. Even though other countries like India, China, Brazil, even they have contributed to IMF. We actually provide donations to the IMF. Even though our contributions have gone up, our voting share has not increased. It has not matched with that of the other countries, thus creating a mismatch with regard to the power equation at IMF, and the same can be seen at the World Bank as well. If you look at the head of the World Bank, right, it's always an American candidate, a candidate pushed by the US government who gets nominated as the governor of the World Bank. Same with IMF. All the key policy decisions of the IMF are largely determined by the European Union countries and the United States. They retain a higher voting share and they have prevented governance reforms from taking place. This is one way through which Western countries have largely controlled the global financial system. So this has been challenged by the BRICS countries starting from at least 2006-2009. Their primary objective was to set up a parallel global economic architecture to rival the Western countries, to counter World Bank and IMF that were until then dominated just by the Western countries. Now just look at this infographic here. It highlights the voting share and the divisions that you can see between the Western countries and the BRICS countries. The United States has always retained the highest voting share for itself at the IMF, almost 17% of it. Whereas a country like India or even China, their voting share is hardly around 1.9% and 3.7% respectively. Look at the share for Japan, Germany. Now compare this with India, China or Brazil. You'll start seeing the disparity at the IMF. Even though these countries are contributing to IMF, their voting share has not increased to match with that of the other countries. So this reduces our say in global economic matters and allows these Western countries to dominate key policy decisions of the World Bank and the IMF. So this was the primary driving factor for the BRICS countries to come together to form the BRICS in order to challenge Western dominance and to create a parallel architecture to support the financial reforms and to initiate economic changes in the global economy. Now just to give you a better idea, please look at how IMF uses the quota system, how the voting share is distributed to various countries and on what basis are quotas distributed to the member countries. See, IMF quotas are based essentially on the resource contribution that a member country is making. That is, depending on how much a country is contributing to the IMF, depending on the funds a country is providing, depending on that, a quota is allocated, which is denominated in SDR or special drawing rights, which is the designated currency of the IMF. Along with resource contribution, which determines the quotas for different members, based on that, voting share is allocated to these countries. The voting percentages that you just saw, right? It is determined on the basis of the resource contribution. And even a country's access to financing will depend on the quota which has been allocated to it. The SDR that is allocated to a member's share is also dependent on the country's contribution. Now, the problem for countries like India or China or Russia or Brazil is that our voting share has not gone up, even though our resource allocation has increased. The voting share has largely been cornered by the Western countries, with only nominal changes happening in the voting share for developing countries. So this is one discrepancy with regard to IMF, and also you can see the same problems at the World Bank. That is why the BRICS countries started pushing for governance reforms of these financial institutions. So the BRICS countries have taken up a number of initiatives in this regard. In 2012, they tried pushing for IMF reforms by increasing their contribution. They announced an additional funding of $75 billion to the IMF, which would increase the lending capacity of IMF to bail out countries that are facing a financial emergency. But the condition was the voting share should increase. Voting reforms, governance reforms have to be introduced at the IMF, which would favor the BRICS countries, and based on this, they were ready to provide $75 billion in funding. But Western countries wouldn't allow this to happen. These changes that were sought by BRICS countries with regard to voting share was not carried out, and this pushed the BRICS countries to set up their own parallel institutions. In 2013, during the 5th BRICS Summit that was held in South Africa, the BRICS countries announced their own initiative to set up parallel global financial institutions to counter World Bank and IMF, which were dominated by Western countries. This is what led to the establishment of the NDB, or the New Development Bank, which was formally announced at the Fortaleza Summit in Brazil in 2014. During the Fortaleza Summit in 2014, the establishment of New Development Bank was announced, which would be a rival or a counter to the Western-dominated World Bank. Just like World Bank provides loans and funding for developmental projects, sustainable projects, similarly, the NDB would also provide funding for development initiatives in the BRICS countries and also in other countries which are seeking membership in the bank. Today, the portfolio of NDB has increased to more than $30 billion, and it is funding more than 80 big projects across the BRICS nations. In fact, many new members have been added over the years to the New Development Bank, and several development projects are being sponsored and funded by the New Development Bank. It has emerged as a major financial institution that supplements the efforts of other global multilateral institutions like World Bank and regional institutions like Asian Development Bank. The NDB is funding projects in key sectors like renewable energy and clean energy, transportation and connectivity, poverty alleviation projects, tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, improving digital infrastructure. All such projects are being funded by the NDB in several countries, and today it has emerged as one of the biggest achievements of the BRICS grouping. Is that clear? So for prelims, please note down some of these facts. The NDB is headquartered at Shanghai in China, and if you look at its composition and how the voting share is distributed, these countries have provided a very fair division, and they ensure that all the 5 countries have equal voting powers. That is how the NDB is different from the World Bank. All the 5 founding members, they have been given equal voting powers. They've all made a equal contribution, and this ensures that the NDB functions in a more fair manner compared to the World Bank, which is dominated by Western countries. Is that clear? At any point, the BRICS countries will have majority shareholding. 55% of the voting power will rest with the founding members of BRICS, because membership to NDB is open to other countries, to all the UN members as well. Any UN member country can apply for membership to NDB. So, over the last few years, new countries have been added to the bank as members, but the BRICS countries will always retain majority voting share, and the founding members, that is BRICS countries, they will have equal voting powers. So, the expansion of NDB has become a major focal point of BRICS. Several developing countries, countries in the global south which are interested, they have all applied for membership, and many new countries have been added over the years. Please make a note of this. Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Uruguay, all these countries, they represent the global south. They're all developing nations, right? Some of them are least developed countries and some of them are developing nations. And they have been added as members to the NDB, and they also receive funding from this institution to finance their developmental projects. There are many more countries which have applied for NDB's membership, and this marks one of the biggest achievements of the BRICS grouping. During the Fortaleza Summit, there was another initiative that the BRICS countries took up. They established the contingent reserve arrangement as a counter to the IMF. If NDB rivals the World Bank in terms of lending for developmental projects, similarly, the CRA of BRICS is seen as a rival to the IMF. It essentially provides emergency funding, contingent funding, for countries that are facing a liquidity crisis. Like, for example, if Sri Lanka is facing a liquidity crisis, right, a currency swap arrangement will be provided to support countries that are going through such financial crisis situations. That's what exactly the IMF does. But developing countries, underdeveloped countries have a problem with the IMF because IMF support is always conditional. If IMF support has to be availed, some of the conditions laid down by IMF has to be fulfilled. And these conditions are always designed to favor Western countries. India had this bitter experience back in 1991 when we faced a BOP crisis, a balance of payments crisis. In return for taking help from IMF, we had to initiate a number of forced economic reforms. You have to devalue your currency. You have to open up your market for foreign investment, create a bigger space for foreign players, which would benefit Western companies and Western institutions. So this could compromise your economic sovereignty as well. So many developing nations have this problem with the IMF, and the BRICS provided an alternative by establishing the CRA, the Contingent Reserve Arrangement. It has been set up with a base capital, an initial capital of $100 billion, and all countries have contributed equally again. The whole idea is to help out the member countries and any other developing, underdeveloped country which might face a financial crisis. Now today, BRICS is not just limited to such economic initiatives. BRICS is much more than that. It is focused on bringing out a possible reserve currency, or it is trying to de-dollarize the global economy, to reduce the dependency of the global economy on the US dollar. That's another major initiative that the BRICS is thinking about. It's a proposed initiative. In fact, some of the countries, they're already trading with each other in their respective national currencies. Like India, Russia have tried the arrangement. Russia, China have used their national currencies to pay for their respective imports. So these countries are also looking to bypass the SWIFT payment gateway, which is again Western dominated. Currently, the Western sanctions on Russia, the American sanctions on China, right? They're very effective because of the global economy's dependency on the US dollar and how global banks and financial institutions use the SWIFT payment gateway. So US and Western countries have that added advantage to shut off few countries by closing these payment channels. So BRICS countries are planning to create their own alternate payment systems. They're also planning to come out with their own credit rating agency. Because some of the top credit rating agencies of the world, they're all based out of Western countries. You might have heard about S&P, Standard & Poor, or Moody's, right? Or Finch. These are the top credit rating agencies of the world. These credit rating agencies were largely held responsible for the 2009 financial crisis, where they gave very bad ratings for very poor loans, which eventually perpetuated the subprime crisis in the US housing market. So the BRICS countries have thought about setting up their own credit rating agencies. They have even proposed a submarine cable, OFC cable, to protect their digital security. These are some proposed initiatives of the BRICS countries. The whole idea is to reduce their dependency on the Western countries and to create parallel institutions that move away from Western dominance. Today, BRICS has started focusing on many other areas as well, including geopolitical issues. It's no longer just focused on global economic issues. It's focused on strategic and security issues as well. BRICS countries have held discussions on the situation in Syria, in Afghanistan. They focus on counter-terrorism as well. They are focusing on tackling organized crime, especially drug trafficking, which is a huge security threat for these countries. So increasingly, BRICS has become a geopolitical grouping. It's not just an economic grouping. The countries are focusing on climate change, clean and renewable energy, improving cultural relations, and ensuring their energy security. So truly the BRICS has become a diversified group over the last 15 years. Now coming to the last point, why is the upcoming summit important? What does it hold for India, and why is the summit significant for the world? As I told you at the beginning, the summit is taking place at a crucial point in time when the world is facing several economic and geopolitical challenges. First, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, then we had the Russia-Ukraine war, which disrupted the global economy, and it continues to have a major economic and geopolitical impact. Now, this is the first BRICS in-person meeting which is taking place after 2019. The last in-person meeting where the leaders physically participated in a summit was back in 2019, before the pandemic broke out. Since the pandemic broke out due to pandemic restrictions, the summit has never taken place in physical format. All the previous BRICS meetings after 2019, they have been held virtually. So for the first time after COVID-19, after the Russia-Ukraine war, an in-person meeting is taking place. It's also the first in-person meeting after the India-China border clashes that happened in 2020 at Ladakh. So it presents an opportunity for India and China to work out a settlement to reduce tensions along the disputed border in Ladakh. Just last week, the core commander level meeting between the Indian Army and the Chinese PLA took place, and the meeting ended on a positive note as both the sides came out with a joint statement. They are looking to de-escalate from the border standoff at few places in Ladakh, which might end the crisis that began in 2020. There has been some positive progress. It might lay the groundwork for a possible meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. The two leaders have met before as well. They have met at the Bali summit of G20. They have met at SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. But still, this would be the first time that the two leaders would be meeting after 2020 in a closed setup. There would be just 4 or 5 leaders present, giving them an opportunity to resolve the tensions and keep aside the dispute and achieve complete de-escalation and disengagement. In this regard, both the sides, diplomatically, they are trying to take the necessary measures. That's why these high-level military commander meetings have taken place, followed by back-to-back meetings between the foreign ministry of both the sides. They're trying to de-escalate and disengage from the flashpoints along the Ladakh sector. Also, it gives India a great opportunity before the G20 summit. In just 1 month, India will be hosting the G20 summit. All the G20 leaders will be in India. So this would be an opportunity for India to strike consensus Because currently within the G20, there are a lot of divisions with Western countries on one side, Russia and China on the other side. Now India is trying very hard and is struggling to bring these countries together to arrive at some positive conclusion at the next month's G20 summit. So the BRICS Summit will be an opportunity for India to bring about some consensus by working with Russia and China, by moderating their position, so that at the G20 summit in September, we can bring all the countries together to work out a positive joint statement. Because there has to be a positive outcome, or else it would be a failure of India's presidency, right? So India is facing a very big challenge to iron out the differences between Western countries and Russia and China. So BRICS Summit could be a platform where we could bring some sense of coordination with Russia and China. And also, it's interesting to note that Russian President Putin won't be able to participate in person at the BRICS Summit because the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for war crimes committed by Putin in Ukraine. So South Africa, being a signatory to the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, it would be legally bound to arrest Putin if he were to enter South Africa. So as a result, South Africa and Russia have reached an arrangement that Russian president will not physically visit South Africa for the summit, but he will participate virtually. But the other four leaders, Prime Minister Modi, Xi Jinping, then Brazilian leader Lula da Silva, they will all personally participate in the upcoming summit. And the last point, this would also be a great opportunity for India and the BRICS countries to work with the global south, to work with other developing, underdeveloped nations and small island states. Because South Africa is inviting all the countries of African Union, right? It is inviting few countries from South America, South Asia and Southeast Asia as well as guest countries to participate in the BRICS Summit. So it gives a great opportunity for the BRICS to reach out to African countries and also consider the expansion of the BRICS grouping. This is a priority agenda on the list. Almost 40 plus countries have shown interest to join the BRICS grouping, which shows the rising profile of the BRICS. 19 countries have already applied formally for membership to the BRICS. Out of these countries, 4 of them have the highest potential. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iran and Argentina. They are considered as the most likely additions to the BRICS grouping, and very soon you might see new members being added. So it might happen at the Johannesburg summit itself, and that's one reason why the summit is extremely important. But one problem would be China's push for its Global Development Initiative and its Belt and Road Initiative. China, which is clearly the most dominating member within the BRICS, it has tried to push its own initiatives, which creates problems for India. In fact, even at the SCO summit, which was hosted by India, China tried to push the Global Development Initiative that it has been pursuing. Under the Global Development Initiative, China is promoting its Belt and Road Initiative, which is a network of infrastructure projects. But the problem with Belt and Road Initiative is that one component, the CPEC component, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is an integral part of BRI, it compromises India's sovereignty. The CPEC project involving China and Pakistan, it passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Now this project is unacceptable for India as it directly challenges India's territorial claims. So India has boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative, and we have opposed China's push for the Global Development Initiative. So China might try to bring up these discussions again, which might create a problem. But otherwise, the summit holds great significance for India as well, because there are many key issues to be discussed. So this is the complete foundation you need into this topic. Going forward in this week, we will see many more articles regarding the developments and the initiatives. So this foundation will help you easily understand whatever developments happen in the next week. Now let's move on to the next article. We have a column on page number 11 that talks about a recent initiative of the Supreme Court of India to tackle gender stereotyping in our judiciary and in our legal framework. Recently, the Supreme Court has brought out a handbook. It's called the Handbook on Combating Gender Stereotypes. The foreword for this has been written by the Chief Justice of India himself, and it's essentially a set of guidelines for judges and lawyers in the country to eliminate gender-based stereotypes in our legal system. As you know, India is largely an orthodox patriarchal country where women are discriminated, right? And there are a lot of gender-based stereotypes that prevail in our society. In a male-dominated society and in an orthodox society, there are a lot of presumptions that are placed on women. There are a lot of stereotypes associated with women. And this has entered our legal framework as well. So when lawyers draft their petitions, or when judges pass their judgments and write down the final judgments, number of these stereotypes against women, they become embedded into the legal system as well. So the Supreme Court has thought that it is high time to do away with these archaic, outdated, traditional ideas and to counter the patriarchy in the Indian society by introducing changes within the legal system. It has brought out this handbook which will identify the gender-based stereotypes in our laws, in the judiciary's judgments, and in the arguments of the lawyers. And it is suggesting gender unjust terms to be replaced with alternate terms so that it provides for gender equality within the legal system. Is that clear? For example, in the judiciary, terms such as adulteress have often been used while referring to extramarital affairs. In case of an extramarital affair which has reached the court, it's only the woman in question who's called as an adulteress. But there is no separate name attached to the man who's also involved in that extramarital affair. Essentially, it is a result of stereotyping. It's a result of colonial hangover as well on our legal system. And it's a result of the patriarchy that's prevalent in the Indian society. Rather, in any orthodox traditional societies, there will be such stereotypes present that it's the women who corrupted the man. Right? These are traditional stereotypes present in orthodox societies. So the Supreme Court has removed this word. It has directed all lawyers and judges to not use the word adulteress going forward when dealing with extramarital affairs. Instead, it will be replaced with a very simple line, women who has engaged in sexual relations outside of marriage, just like a man might have engaged in extramarital relations. Is that clear? That's one example. Another example is that while referring to women and wife in legal terms, there would be a prefix added to it. They would often add obedient wife, chaste women, someone who is pure, or they would also add other stereotypical words which highlight male domination, which highlight the feature of a patriarchal society where women are seen as the property of the man. Such words, outdated terms, are being removed from the legal system. Instead, plain words like women and wife will be used. There is no need to say that the wife is obedient. Even the word housewife in itself is a stereotype, it's a demeaning word. This word is being replaced with homemaker, which is a more neutral and a gender equal term. So these are very, very important guidelines, very subtle guidelines that the Supreme Court has issued that plays a very big role in eliminating gender-based stereotypes. Is that clear? It's not just with regard to women. There are stereotypes with regard to men and people of other gender as well. So terms such as effeminate, which undermines and stereotypes men with less machoistic qualities, right? Or terms, very derogatory terms like faggot, which is often used to describe people with different sexual orientation, right? These are all colonial origin terms. These derogatory terms are being completely removed and more just descriptions will be provided in the legal system. If, let's say, there is a case involving a homosexual or a bisexual individual or a transgender, the appropriate terms will be used instead of referring to them as a faggot. Right? Faggot is a very derogatory term. There are many other such derogatory terms. Right? So all these terms are going to be replaced with more progressive terminologies that is going to refine our legal system, and it will get rid of the stereotypes which are biased against women and also against gender minorities. This will play a very big role in cases related to sexual violence. Now you might ask, what's the big deal in just changing the words? Just by replacing words, will there be a real change? Yes. The answer is yes, because stereotypes, they have a huge impact. See, stereotypes are self-perpetuating. The stereotypes present in the society, right, they translate into real world. It leads to actual exclusion and discrimination of a certain community which is being stereotyped. Now imagine people of a particular region being stereotyped, or people of a certain caste being stereotyped. The stereotypes, which might just be a casual reference or a joke for you, when it persists in the society, it leads to a systematic exclusion, discrimination of that entire community. When it comes to cases involving rapes, sexual violence, these stereotypes play a very big role, as the stereotypes are skewed against women. When the entire burden is placed on women to behave, to abide by the norms of the society, right? Sexual offenses are seen as acceptable, or at least they are justified by giving excuses that it was the woman who was not behaving properly. You would have heard ridiculous statements being made after many serious cases of rape and sexual violence, where the blame is put on the woman, where the woman's dressing habits are questioned, whether she was in a sexually active relationship, or whether the woman drinks or smokes. Her personal life is brought into the case, where the very direction of the case is given a different twist by the media and by certain elements, and that highlights the impact of stereotypes in the society. So removing these stereotypes will go a long way in refining our legal system. It will make it very clear that in a sexual relationship, consent is what matters, right? It doesn't matter what clothes a woman wears, whether she drinks or smokes, those things don't matter, right? There have been many cases where judges have passed unsuitable remarks as they are influenced by social stereotypes that are present. There are cases where lawyers have made very, very controversial statements questioning the manner in which the woman was dressed, saying that it was the victim who provoked the man and that led to the rape or the molestation. These are unjustifiable arguments. It's all a result of stereotyping, and the Supreme Court is doing away with it, and this will have a long-term impact on the society as well. There are incidents where rape victims or survivors, they may not be able to report the case immediately because there is social stigma. They would have a lot of fear as well associated with reporting these cases. If they report the case few years later, again doubts are cast on the women, alleging that why did she wait for so many years to report the case? The very validity of the report is questioned. The complaints are dismissed on these grounds. This is again a result of stereotyping. The Supreme Court is trying to do away with these harmful stereotypes, asserting that women will have the right to report rape incidents at any point in time. There might be delays of years together. It's because of the social stigma attached with it, right? So the Supreme Court is taking a very progressive step in this regard. Usually there is a stereotype, a social presumption that women are illogical, they are emotional, they can't take right decisions. This has fed into our legal system, into the terminologies which are used by lawyers and judges. They are being removed completely. There are judges who have often opined that women should have children. Now this is a matter of personal choice. Just because she's a woman, right, doesn't mean they don't have their own sexual reproductive rights. But the stereotypes have fed into the judiciary, into the legal system. All these terminologies, these references, which are colored with gender-based stereotyping, they are being removed permanently by the judiciary. So it will definitely play a role in shunning the stereotypes and in promoting gender equality. And the Supreme Court, in fact, has led from the front in this regard. Supreme Court is not simply preaching here. It has a very good record, a very good precedent, where in several landmark cases, it has upheld gender rights and it has fought against gender stereotyping. For example, in the Joseph Shine case, adultery was struck down under section 497 of the IPC. Adultery again refers to extramarital affairs. If you look at the provisions of section 497 of the IPC, it was clearly biased against the woman. The law was in such a way that as if it was the woman who instigated the man to enter into a extramarital relationship and to commit adultery. Essentially, the social norm and the social pressure to conform to the norms of the society was on the woman, not on the man. So this law was struck down by the court. The obvious patriarchy in this law was thrown out by the court, by the Supreme Court in the landmark Joseph Shine case. In the state of Jharkhand versus Shailendra Kumar Rai case, the controversial two-finger test was categorically banned by the Supreme Court. Two-finger tests were used following a rape complaint to determine whether the rape victim was sexually active or not. Now, how does it matter whether the victim was sexually active or not to punish the accused in a rape case? So the two-finger test was categorically banned by the Supreme Court in this case. In the state of Punjab versus Gurmeet Singh case, the Supreme Court held that even if there is a delay in filing a complaint in a rape case, it should be accepted because inherently a rape complaint is deemed to be credible. Right? Since it's the victim, the survivor who is at the receiving end, right? Whether the complaint is true or false, that will be established by the investigating authorities later. But accepting the complaint, registering the FIR is a basic necessity, and questions cannot be raised as to why the woman was silent for so many years. Because there are many reasons why a woman might hesitate to complain. It's largely due to social stigma, right? So all these landmark judgments have been passed with the Supreme Court in the past, which highlights its progressive inclination to remove gender stereotyping and promote a gender-neutral environment. Is that clear? Now this completes my detailed discussion. Now let's head towards the prelim section and quickly look at some of the small articles in today's newspaper. We have an article on page number 1 and 6 that refers to the G20 meeting of digital ministers. This meeting took place in Bengaluru over the last 3 days, and Prime Minister Modi addressed the gathering and he highlighted India's achievements in digitizing our economy. He pointed out how digital technology has revolutionized India's governance and India's economy. He credited the JAM Trinity, that is Jandan Yojana, Aadhaar and Mobile, how the three have been interlinked to digitize the Indian economy and provide for better delivery of services. So while talking about the need to digitize the economy, he urged G20 countries to work together, and he mentioned one of India's important initiatives known as Bhashini. Now this is an important topic. He referred to Bhashini, which is an AI platform that India is developing for language translation to improve digitization of the economy. Now see, on the internet, in the digital world, the most preferred language is often the English language, right? So the lack of priority given to other regional vernacular languages acts as a deterrence with regard to providing digital services, right? People who can't speak or who can't read English, they might be discouraged from accessing digital services. It might affect the delivery of services. That is why India has launched a digital program, and an AI-based platform is being developed by using artificial intelligence. A language translation platform is being created called Bhashini. It's an acronym for Bhasha Interface for India, also called as Digital India Bhashini. This platform will be made available to all government agencies, private players, the tech companies, the internet-based platforms, so that they can use the Bhashini platform to translate the content into different languages. This initiative was announced under the National Language Translation Mission, launched in the 2021-22 budget. Is that clear? So it will help all the digital players to adopt different languages by using a AI translation model. So it's called Bhashini. Now please find out which ministry is leading this initiative. All right, that's a small exercise for you. There is a certain ministry that is leading the Bhashini AI translation model. Find out which ministry is that and post that in the comments below. Next, on page number 1, we have an article referring to the white-bellied sea eagle. The white-bellied sea eagle, also known as the raptors, they are listed as least concern on the IUCN Red List. So it's not a threatened species. But however, it is an important species, particularly in the coastal areas, because the white-bellied sea eagle is an apex predator. It's a diurnal monogamous bird of prey. It operates both during daytime and nighttime, all right? And it's a very aggressive hunter. It hunts sea snakes, fish, and small birds and rodents as well. And it's often found in coastal areas and also in inland waters and freshwater lakes. This bird species can be found all across South Asia and Southeast Asia, from India to Bangladesh to Southeast Asia to Sri Lanka. They're also found in Australia and in China. This is the range of the white-bellied sea eagle. Its importance lies in the fact that it's an apex predator. It's right at the top of the food chain, and it plays a key role in maintaining ecological balance. Now, a latest study has pointed out that these raptors have started preferring the high tension towers that carry the power lines, the power cables. They are preferring them to lay their nest, to build the nest where the eggs are laid, because the natural habitat is not available for them, particularly in coastal areas where you don't have enough tree cover. We have further destroyed the tree cover through deforestation. So these birds are increasingly preferring man-made structures like power towers where they are building their nests. And this is not good. It's dangerous for the species. So this threat has been flagged by a recent study. So please note down the role of the white-bellied sea eagle and its conservation status and its distribution. Next, on page number 3, we have an article referring to the discovery of a megalithic site in Kerala. In Kerala, at a place known as Nagaparamba in the Malappuram district, there has been an accidental discovery of a megalithic site. The local construction teams, they were building a water pipeline. While digging the ground for laying the water pipeline, they came across burial mounds. Which appear to be of archaeological significance. Then the matter was reported to the authorities, and the State Archaeological Department has carried out an archaeological excavation. Following excavation, they have found evidence of hat stones, also known as topikallu. Hat stones are used to cover burial urns. They are used as lids to cover the burial urns. Right? In the megalithic period, around 2000, 3000 years ago, when people were buried, right, the burial urn would be covered with a lid called a hat stone. It's made out of laterite stone. And these hat stones have been discovered along with few other implements. They have discovered few iron implements and tools, and other artifacts have been discovered, which helps us understand the life and the culture of the people who inhabited this region almost 2000, 3000 years ago in the megalithic era. All right. So such an important discovery has been made where hat stones have been found. So UPSC might ask you a basic question on what are hat stones. Hat stones are lids that were used. They are laterite stones used as lids to cover burial urns in the megalithic period. Next, an important article for Indian economy. The government of India, that is the finance ministry, has levied 40% duty on onion exports to balance the demand-supply situation. After tomatoes, onion prices have started shooting up, the two ahead of the festival season. Now we are headed towards the festival season, right? So during the festival season, prices of fruits and vegetables and flowers, they shoot up, causing widespread disruption in the market, contributing to inflation. So onion prices, which have started shooting up, is a result of the demand-supply mismatch. The demand remains consistently high. It's going to increase further during the festive season, but the supply has been affected. Due to extreme rainfall, due to transportation issues, there is a shortage of onions in the market. So to prevent onion exports and ensure enough domestic supply is available, the central government has levied 40% duty on onion exports. India is a major onion exporting country. It exports close to 1 million tons of onions to Bangladesh, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates and other countries. So to regulate and restrict onion exports, 40% duties are being levied by the Ministry of Finance that will discourage the export, thus protecting the domestic stock. NAFED, which is responsible for releasing and maintaining the stock levels, has auctioned onion to increase the supply in the market to try and moderate the onion prices. Next, on the same page, we have an article referring to a unique type of lotus called the Namoh 108 variety. This is a very unique lotus. As you know, lotus is the national flower of India. This lotus, it's found only in Manipur. It grows only in Manipur. It's called 108, Namoh 108, because it has 108 petals. It has 108 petals that are organized in a symmetric manner, right? And the number 108 has a lot of cultural, religious significance as well, right? Particularly in Hinduism, in Buddhism as well, lotus flower is seen as sacred, and the digit 108 also has a sacred significance. So an institute of the CSIR, the Council for Scientific Industrial Research, under which you have the National Botanical Research, right? The National Botanical Research Institute, or NBRI, which is a CSIR institute. It has further conducted studies on this lotus, which is a unique arrangement of petals. It has 108 exact petals. So this institute has studied the genomic sequence of this lotus. It has understood the genomic sequence. It's the first time that a lotus variety has been genetically sequenced in India, and its fiber quality has been improved. The original native flower that occurs in Manipur does not grow anywhere else. It grows only in Manipur. And the fiber quality was very less. Now, by understanding the genetic sequence, the germ plasm has been modified and desired characteristics have been added to the lotus. So, the National Botanical Research Institute has ensured that the fiber quality has improved so that fiber can be extracted from this lotus. And it has added other attributes and characteristics which will allow the lotus to be cultivated anywhere in India, not just in Manipur. You can even extract a perfume from this. So there's a lot of economic value attached to the lotus. You can make apparels, you can make textiles from the fiber which is extracted, and perfumes can also be extracted. So this unique variety of lotus that has been launched by CSIR is named as Namoh 108. Next, we have an article referring to the ongoing border talks between India and China. There are a couple of articles on page 6 and as well as on page 9. Alright, the article refers to the latest round of border talks that took place and how China keeps instigating its neighbors, particularly those countries that are getting closer to the United States. Alright, so that is what the article is talking about. But the article mentions few important locations that I want to highlight. In 2020, when the Ladakh clashes happened, there were few places where the standoff occurred. For example, at the Galwan River Valley. At Galwan River Valley, that's where the major clashes took place. Then near Depsang Plains over here, at Panongso Lake, right? These are some places where Indian and Chinese troops, they clashed, and it led to major border tensions between the two sides. Over the last 3 years, several rounds of border talks have been held to de-escalate from the situation. Following these talks between senior military commanders, de-escalation has been achieved at Panongso Lake and Galwan Valley. Whereas at few places like Depsang Plain and also at the Chumur sector in Demchok and Daulat Beg Oldi, at these places, high tensions, they still remain. Alright? See, at Chumur we have a border meeting point which allows Indian and Chinese troops to meet and discuss and negotiate. At Demchok and Depsang Plains, the border standoff continues even today. So across these flashpoints, negotiations are taking place to try and resolve the border tensions and to carry out disengagement and de-escalation. There has been some positive movement, at least between the two armed forces, right? There has been a positive discussion last week. One should hope that before the BRICS Summit, there might be a big announcement that could lead to a de-escalation from this region. So in this context, there is a very important strategic road which is in news called the DSDBO road. The DSDBO road, which connects Durbuk in the Leh district with Shok and Daulat Beg Oldi. This strategic road built by India, by the Border Roads Organization, it passes almost parallel to the LAC, to the line of actual control. This is a key highway that India has built that helps in mobilizing Indian troops right to the disputed border. In fact, China has been critical of India's road construction activity. It has opposed the construction of DSDBO road, and it's believed that that was one of the reasons why China carried out incursions in the Ladakh sector. So please be aware of the alignment of this strategic road that India has built near the line of actual control. Next, we have an article on page number 8 that refers to a massacre that the British had committed during the First War of Indian Independence. It's called the Ajnala massacre. The Ajnala massacre, which was seen as part of the 1857 rebellion. All right, this was largely an undiscovered site. It was a part of the First War of Indian Independence, part of the 1857 uprising, which was largely unreported. But in 2014, skeletal remains were found at this place called Ajnala, which is near Amritsar in Punjab. These skeletal remains were studied for their genetics. DNA studies were carried out, and it was established that the DNA matches with that of Indian soldiers at that point in time. So it points to a rebellion between Lahore and Amritsar. An entire contingent of the 26th Native Bengal Infantry, they crossed over from Lahore and fought against the British during the 1857 uprising near this place called Ajnala in Amritsar, nearby Amritsar. Almost 282 Indian soldiers were killed by the East India Company, and their skeletal remains were recently discovered, and it points to the forgotten part of our history, which is intrinsic to our First War of Indian Independence. So please be aware of the Ajnala massacre that took place in 1857. Coming to the last article for today, the Government of India has brought out green hydrogen standards. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has laid out green hydrogen standards for the country. As you know, green hydrogen is seen as a clean, renewable form of energy that can help us move away from fossil fuels. India also has a mission, the National Green Hydrogen Mission, to promote the production and adoption of green hydrogen. But to classify and identify green hydrogen, specific standards had to be set. So the Ministry of New Renewable Energy has brought out these standards, which makes India one of the first countries in the world to come out with a proper definition of green hydrogen along with the determining standards. These standards are based on the emission levels involved in the production of green hydrogen. Is that clear? So the new standards, they recognize both electrolysis-based production of green hydrogen and the biomass-based method of hydrogen production. It's giving recognition to both the forms of hydrogen generation, green hydrogen production, and in the entire process, right from water treatment, electrolysis, gas purification, drying, compression of hydrogen. There are many steps involved in production of green hydrogen. In the entire process, the total emissions has to be calculated. If the total emission is under 2 kilograms of CO2 in a 12-month average, then such hydrogen produced by the industry is categorized as green hydrogen. Green hydrogen has to be less intensive with regard to emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So threshold has been set as 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen produced over a 12-month average. If this threshold criteria is met, if the emissions involved in the production is lesser than 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, then such hydrogen produced through electrolysis or biomass-based method, such hydrogen will be classified as green hydrogen. The producers will enjoy incentives and financial support from the government to produce such standards of green hydrogen, which will help us to transition towards cleaner forms of energy. All right? So please make a note of this important development as well. So with this, we complete today's discussion. I hope you guys have understood all the topics. Please take up these 2 questions for your answer writing practice. All right? So let's meet tomorrow again. Till then, take care. Have a good day.